Begin in the name of Allah, the Compassionate and the Merciful. Today we are taking this lecture for the subject of Morphology and Syntax, which will be taught to the students of third semester studying in BS English program at the Department of English, Shaheed Benazir Bhutto University, Sheringal. Our today's lecture is about sentences in present-day English and the classification of sentences in present-day English on the basis of syntactic tests, purpose, and clauses. Let's now highlight the objective of the present e-lecture on sentences in present-day English. But before we embark this journey, I request all of you to remember those who have lost their lives in this global pandemic and who are recovering from diseases caused by novel coronavirus. At the same time, I want you to support all those frontline workers, whether they are from the medical profession or any other sphere of life, who are fighting for the lives of others in this deadliest crisis. The objectives of today's e-lecture are as under. The primary objective of our today's e-lecture is to understand the concept of sentence as a syntactic category in present-day English, and the secondary objectives are the classification of sentences based on syntactic tests in present-day English, classification of sentences based on purpose in present-day English, and classification of sentences based on clauses in present-day English. In other words, we want to typify sentences on the basis of syntactic tests, purpose, and clauses in the present-day English. Okay, right. Before I start the e-lecture, I would want all the students to look into this definition of language which was provided by Professor Noam Chomsky in 1957 in his famous book Syntactic Structures. Now, according to this definition, I will consider language to be a set of sentences. You all are familiar with the fact that a set is a collection of certain objects or ideas. So if we look at this definition, we can find out that language in itself is a collection of sentences. This is what Noam Chomsky defined the very true nature of language, and this is what forms the very core of studies in the area of syntax, which is obviously the study of how sentences are formed in a language. Now, if we look at sentences, uh, we think of them as the highest ranking unit in a language. Uh, if we look at linguistic or the study of language as a whole, we might come across different ranking units, starting from phonetics, where the ranking unit of analysis was a phoneme, and then we came across phonology, where the ranking unit of analysis was what might be termed as syllable. Okay, and then we had in morphology another ranking unit which was termed as morpheme. So when it comes to syntax, we come to the highest ranking unit in the study of language, which is obviously sentence. Now, sentence have been defined, or sentences have been defined in various ways by different linguists. But in terms of its length, it is often difficult to determine the boundary of a sentence, especially in speech. If we are listening to someone, or if we are watching a movie, let's say in English language, it is often very difficult to determine the start and the end of a sentence. So in speech, it's very complex. And now, in terms of different definitions that have been provided by different linguists, in writing, a sentence is usually defined as starting with a capital letter and ending in a full stop. But as I have mentioned earlier, that if we take that definition, this definition might be applicable to all that is written on a piece of paper or anywhere else, uh, anything that is associated with the writing system. We can determine the nature of a sentence from that. But when it comes to speech, it is difficult for us to actually apply this definition. Another definition, normally that is given in books of grammar and in other books, in other reference books, that is the arrangement of words expressing a complete thought might be termed as a sentence. Now, if a sentence is the representation of a complete thought, if we, let's say, take that definition into consideration, we would come across that sometimes even larger chunks of language, let's say discourses, where various sentences are combined. Now these combined systems or these combined sentences, they portray a single thought as a whole. Let's say the heading of a news article, so if we take that these notions into consideration, we would come across some complications in determining language sentence or determining sentences as expression of a complete thought in a language. Now, another definition that has been provided in books of grammar and that um, we read, and the teachers at our schools, they have provided this definition to us on numerous occasions, is that a sentence is a subject followed by a predicate, and a subject is usually in the form of a personal pronoun, or it is in the form of a noun phrase, and the predicate is a part of the sentence which starts with the verb or the auxiliary verb, and then part of sentences following it, the entire part is termed as predicate. Now if we take this definition into consideration, again we will come across some complications, because certain sentences in present day English, they don't have subjects at all. For example, when I say, let's say, when I give the example of an imperative sentence, close the door. Now in the sentence close the door, there is no subject, but yet it is regarded as a complete sentence, a complete imperative sentence in the English language. So, again, there is this complication associated with this definition. Another, or the last definition, which has been provided by Professor Noam Chomsky, is that a sentence is the sum of a noun phrase and a verb phrase. We can see that a sentence constitutes a noun phrase and a verb phrase. A noun phrase can have a determiner followed by a noun. It can also have a personal pronoun. For example, if I say the car crashed into the bus, here the car is actually a determiner followed by the is the determiner and car is the noun. So in noun phrase we can have determiner followed by nouns. We can also have personal pronouns, like for example, I drive in my car to university. Here I is the subject. Are you getting my point? Or in other words, I is the noun phrase here. So while looking into these definitions, we understand one thing, that more or less these definitions provide some insight into the nature of a sentence, but it does not capture the essence of a sentence in its entirety. Now, before I move on to the next slide, I want you all to search the internet, to search any other available resource, and to provide different definitions of language, or sorry, of sentence, which have been provided by different linguists.